This is We the Sales Engineers podcast, show 268.
Welcome to We the SEs podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramsey Majaba.
What's up, SE Nation? Today we're going all the way to Japan. Before we get there, my name is Ramsey Majaba. I am your host of We the Sales Engineers podcast, and I'm happy to have you on. So, yeah, we are going to Japan. We're talking to a couple of people who work in the recruitment world in Japan. And we're going to be talking to Bryan Rios and Shivagni Dharne. I hope I said your last name right, Shivagni. I had a great conversation with them. They work as, well, Shivagni is a consultant in a recruiting firm, and Bryan is one of the marketing people there. He has great videos on YouTube. I'll leave a link to that in the show notes. And they have like guidelines for sales and sales engineers and SDRs. So I really enjoyed watching those videos, which led to this interaction. And I've never talked to anyone in Japan or working in Japan. So I really wanted to talk to Bryan and Shivagni and see what it's like recruiting SEs in Japan, which could be very different from other areas in the world. You'll find out throughout the show. So let's just jump in. Hello, Shivagni. Hello, Bryan. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Ramsey. Thank you so much for having us.
It is my pleasure. And I have to admit, you are the first people I talk to who are located in Japan. So it is a pleasure to have you on because, I'm excited about this. And I have so many questions. And we'll start off by maybe asking you to introduce yourself for the audience. And Shivagni, we'll start with you.
All right. So my name is Shivagni. I've been in Japan for about 7 years now. So I started off as a undergraduate student at Beppu City, which is a small town in Kyushu. And then after graduating, I worked as a product manager in Tokyo for 2 years. And then now I'm a consultant at Wall & Case. So I'm a recruiter and I focus on the client-facing engineering side. So I cover positions such as solutions architect, project managers, and so on. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Bryan.
Yeah, I'm at Wall & Case. I'm on the marketing team. So most of what I do is now focused on content. And I used to be an ad tech consultant. But yeah, I never really worked on an SE role. I worked on some things that are kind of close, but I'm hoping to provide anything I can.
Okay. Well, so the reason you're on the show is I found an amazing video from you or Wall & Case. And I'm like, all right, I have to talk. Like, it was well researched. So at a minimum, you do your research ahead of time. So I appreciate the work that you've done. And not to state the obvious. Go ahead.
Just to kind of expand on that story, like it was awesome that you reached out to us because, as I mentioned on YouTube, actually, when we make these like long guides about different positions, and we made one about the client-facing engineering team. Shivagni was a great help in putting that together. And then also when I was researching for the sales engineers position, I came across your channel and I used it for a lot of my research. So it was awesome. It was awesome to have you reach out, and we're really stoked to kind of make this collaboration happen.
Yeah, me too. And okay, so just maybe briefly, because you mentioned consultant and marketing. What is Wall & Case? What is that the company does? And whoever wants to take that can take that. I don't know. I'll
take this. I think Shivagni is gonna be the expert that I'm gonna defer to for the most part. So I'm gonna take the spotlight while I can. Wall & Case, we're a recruitment company based in Tokyo. We started in Tokyo. We're like technically a Japanese company, but we're very global internally. We specialize in specifically ad tech, enterprise tech, consumer tech, and fintech. And then it's kind of broken out by industry on the customer facing side. And then with the back end / engineering teams being a little bit more focused on positions. And so I guess anyone who is looking to move to Japan or interested in working in Japan, feel free to reach out to us, wallandcase.com. It's WAHL and CASE.com. It's a little bit of a confusing name.
I'll leave a link in the show notes so people don't get confused. No worries about that. Okay. So you're a recruiting company, you only focus on Japan. And I don't want to state the obvious, but both of you mentioned, like Shivagni, you mentioned you've been there in Japan for 7 years. Bryan, you didn't mention, but you said you came to Japan. So you're not Japanese. I'm interested in the story of how you got to Japan and why. And Shivagni, we'll start with you as well.
Okay, yeah. So for me, I was in high school in Bangalore, India. So that's like the IT city of India. And basically, I was, our high school got visited by an ambassador from Ritsumeikan Asia Pacific University. That's the university I went to. So we just call it Ritsumeikan APU for short. And then they told us about, studying in Japan, doing your undergraduate degree in Japan, the scholarships that they offer. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to try this out. I'm going to apply for this. And I actually ended up getting the scholarship. And it was before I'd even gotten my results for my final board exams. So I was like, okay, I already have like this university that I can go to, and I have a scholarship. I'll just take it. I'm not going to wait till my results. And I didn't end up applying anywhere else. I just ended up like moving to Japan.
Okay, so just to clarify, you said board exams. So is it the case in India that at the end of every year, there's official government exams that you have to pass?
Yeah. So in 12th grade, like you're in the final year of high school. And some people do like different board exams. Some people do like an Indian board exam, and then some people do like a PUC degree, which is a little bit different. So there's different options there. But then I was in the 11th and 12th grade route where I did the ICSC board, and basically I did that examination. And once you finish that, that's when you start applying for universities and colleges and things like that.
It's similar in Lebanon. We have a government exam. We don't call it board exam. We call it government exam for everybody to pass. And if you don't pass, you have to redo the year. Right? But everybody passed because they let everybody cheat anyway. So that's a different story for a different day. Bryan, what's your story? How did you get to Japan?
So my wife is Japanese.
Okay,
that's basically the whole story. Yeah,
simple. Okay, that's a good reason to go to Japan.
She made me basically she's like there was a point we were doing long distance for a bit, and then she was like, one of us has to move. She had just gotten a new job. I had been at my old job for about 6 years. So she's like, is someone moving? And it's not me. And I was like, yep, sounds good. I'll be there in May. Okay. And I've been here for like 5 years now. It's great. It's a very comfortable country, actually.
Okay. And all right, we're going to talk about, you mentioned that whoever wants to move to Japan should reach out to you. I'm going to ask a few questions about that later. But for now, I am like, we talk about culture a lot in Canada and the US, obviously, probably in other places. And in Canada, the culture is very open. Like you get to go talk to customers. It doesn't have to be formal. You're in jeans, a polo shirt. I don't imagine, like, I might be completely ignorant here, so I'm hoping you educate me about what's it like to work in Japan, not necessarily as a sales engineer specifically, but in general. Like, what's the culture like to work in Japan, and then we can dig in specifically about sales engineering, and whoever wants to take it can take it.
I guess I'll start first with this one, since I did job hunting in Japan right after university. And I remember the first time everybody was telling us like, oh my God, all these interviews are going to be extremely strict. All these Japanese companies are going to be here at this career forum. So we were supposed to like upload our Japanese versions of our CVs on this website called careerforum.net. And then there were a bunch of companies listed. And everybody had these rules, like you have to wear the formal attire, you have to make sure that not everything is black, and white shirt, a suit, it has to be really well made, and then you have to have like a formal bag and formal shoes. You can't have anything casual in your attire. And that was the first impression. I was like, oh my God, working in Japan seems like really strict and really formal. And I started doing interviews and stuff like that. And then I realized when I was at the career forum, there's a lot of companies that are not like that as well. And like Case is one example where we as a culture are not that formal, and we're okay with people wearing polo shirts to work and things like that, and it's very international work environment. So that's when I realized, okay, there's a good mix of both types of companies in Japan. It's not just the very traditional formal companies, but there's also a lot of international companies.
Okay. And Bryan, you seem to be nodding, so.
Yeah, so it is interesting because I remember when I moved to Japan, I had basically I had two goals. One, to find a company that was in this area I really wanted to work in, which was Harajuku, and the other was to find a company where I didn't have to wear a suit. And I was like, it's like a dream. Like I was like, there's no way it's gonna happen. And interviewed all these different companies, always wearing a suit, and they were always wearing a suit. And I was like, this is it. I just co-signed myself to like whatever. I'm just gonna have to do it. Like it's fine. I'm just gonna buckle down, wear a suit every day. It's like July. It was just like burning, like sweating through my my shirt, and like came to Case, super hot that day, wearing my suit. Went into the interview room, and the first person interviewed me was our current new CEO, actually Chad. And Chad sat down and was like wearing like a button up kind of like a plaid shirt, just like a normal button up plaid shirt. I was like, okay, like maybe it's like a kind of a casual day, like it's fine. The next person that came in was Graham, one of the managers at Case. He's wearing a polo, like a short sleeve polo, and I was just like, okay, like it's still like got a collar, so maybe it's like not that informal, like maybe just like again, maybe like a casual day. And then the last person to interview me was the other Bryan. So he's been at the company since it started. His name's Bryan Chang. He's our managing director. He sat down, t-shirt, jeans, like the coolest sneakers I'd ever seen in my life. And I was just like, what is this place? Like, is this a recruitment company? Yeah, it was after that. Like I wore a suit until I signed the offer because I didn't want to like blow anything. And they're like, stop wearing a suit. Like you're freaking us out. Like just come like dressed casual. Yeah, and so I joined Case, and I like, yeah, it's like I got my wish. It's in Harajuku, and I don't have to wear a suit.
Speaking of like freaking people out, that's an amazing story. But in Canada, I worked at Alcatel-Lucent, which is a high-tech company doing networking stuff. We were all in shorts most of the time. A lot of people were in flip-flops. And we get a new hire, and for the first month, the new hire would be wearing a dress shirt and dress pants. And we're looking at them, it's like, when are they going to learn? Like, do we have to say something? You're making us all look bad. We don't want this. So I get that. Okay. So we're in terms of like customer facing roles, sales engineering, the whole channel is about sales engineering, but we can talk about different roles. In terms of sales engineering, I'm curious, when companies come and talk to you about the role, how do they define the role? Like, what is it that they're looking for from the SE, and what's the problem they're trying to solve when they're coming to you for someone to work there?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I think every company has a different problem that they're trying to solve. And the first thing that's really common with all of the companies is probably they start off with, this has been a really difficult role to fill. And they tell us all the reasons why. And I think one of the biggest reasons why is because of the language requirement. So in Japan, they constantly are like the market is constantly short of bilingual talent. There's not enough people who speak the level of Japanese that is required for a client-facing role, which is like fluent and above. And there's the JLPT exams, the Japanese proficiency tests that are ranked, and they usually look for N2 or N1 level of Japanese. So they're like, listen, this is our most important requirement, which is the language requirement. Right. And I think this goes for every role, but I think even more for the sales engineer roles. But then technically speaking, they do tend to a little bit lower their requirements, because they think that maybe they might be able to train this person if they have enough client-facing experience. So yeah, those are the two top things that they look for. great language great language ability for both English and Japanese, and then also client-facing experience.
So that makes me wonder, like, aren't there enough Japanese candidates who would know English at the same time? Are you outsourcing, like bringing people in from foreign, like from US, Europe, or anywhere?
Usually, yes, we focus on the Japanese candidates who can speak English, since they have experience working with Japanese clients as well. And that's another big part of it, is that they, depending on the company, they prefer somebody who has worked with a lot of the local clients in Japan and know exactly what the culture is like and what these meetings are like within Japan.
Okay, so they're most likely going to be a Japanese person who knows English, or you'd have to import someone who knows Japanese from the outside, which, as I understand it, is a difficult language to learn. Bryan can agree with me. I don't know if Shivagni, you would agree or not. Do you know Japanese yet, Shivagni?
Yeah, so I learned Japanese when I was in university, and I definitely think it is difficult. It's not an easy language. From my perspective, I think the difficult part was the writing, the kanji. There's just so many kanji, and you have to remember all of them. I still use Google Translate to read some of the kanji. But speaking wise, I think it's relatively easy to catch up in the beginning with the basic conversations and things like that.
I'm curious how ChatGPT is changing that, like, writing capability. But yeah, I haven't looked into that.
It's Japanese is Shivagni is smart. I'm stupid, and it's so hard. It's so hard. Like, I've been here 5 years. My wife is Japanese, and like she speaks Japanese to my daughter, and I can like kind of keep up with them. But there's sometimes where I'm just like I literally, like, when I go to her kindergarten or whatever, I'll meet the teachers, and the teachers are like talking to me, and I'll be like, yes, okay, yes, and I'll go outside and I'll be like, Nina, that's my daughter. What did they say? She's just like, she has to like explain to me that they said, like, okay, they said read the letter. If you don't understand anything in the letter, you should tell them. If you need to talk to them, like, do this thing. I'm just like, okay, thank you. Like, it's like still pretty tough. The kanji is the worst because like there's several different readings for each kanji, and so like you literally don't even know, like there's no defined like this is how this sounds unless it's like in context with the sentence that you're reading. So like if you see it alone, you don't know how it reads, and like if you see it in the sentence, you have to get the whole context of the sentence to understand. So like it just takes a lot. It's like a grind. You just have to keep practicing and practicing and practicing.
So you're fluent, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
So my kids go to a French school here in Canada. I have the same experience as you, Ryan. So yeah, I know the feeling of having kids that are smarter than you, and they can say things about you and you'll never know.
Wow. Yeah, no, that reminds me, like me and my sister, whenever we go back to India, we start talking in Japanese. If we have something to say about our parents, like, hey, you watch our siblings this time, I'll watch them later. Like, don't tell mom and dad this. Yeah, we'll just start talking in Japanese. And that's the reason why my dad's like constantly trying to figure out stuff on Duolingo, the Japanese learning app.
Yeah.
He's trying to learn the basic Japanese words to try to, understand what we're saying.
Okay. So Shivagni, you're only trilingual, if I understand correctly.
Yeah.
At a minimum.
Yes, that's
okay.
right.
All right. Stop showing off, please. Okay. So
I was gonna say, like, actually I know 4 languages, but I'm like, just stick to trilingual. Just stick to trilingual.
I felt it coming. All right. So when someone's looking for an SE for their company, you said culture, you said language. In terms of like soft skills, in terms of how they do sales engineering, what does a job description look like, or what are they looking for in a sales engineer? Because I'll stop there. What are they looking for in a sales engineer?
Definitely, yeah. Soft skills includes, people have an idea that engineers don't have soft skills sometimes. Yep. So they're constantly saying, like, we don't want engineers, we want client-facing experts. And I think it's because they really want people who are really good with people. Yeah. And the other thing is, if that person is able to take initiative and take, in a scenario where they take leadership over the conversation, or they're able to, not be quiet when they're supposed to speak up. Because it's sometimes, you do come across people who are a little bit shy in those situations, and they want somebody who is not afraid to speak up, who is very, very confident, and is able to ask good questions without, thinking twice about it. I think culturally also, people sometimes are worried about, in Japan, what the other person might think or feel if you ask a certain question, whether it's offensive or not. There's a lot of importance given to how a question is asked and the way that things are communicated, which is why cultural nuances are so important in Japan. And they want to make sure that this person knows exactly when and how to communicate with Japanese clients in Japan. Yeah.
Okay. A personal question for both of you, but you're not from Japan. How did you pick up the cultural nuances? Because Shivagni, you work with clients, you're customer facing, as I understand. Bryan, you're talking to people all the time. How did you pick up the nuances of how you're supposed to act? What's offensive? What's not offensive? When is the right time to ask a question? Because in Canada and the US, we interrupt each other all the time. It's not good etiquette, but that's done. What is it like? How did you pick up the nuances in Japan? And Shivagni, since you're off mute, we'll continue with you.
Oh, okay. So
I can go to Bryan first if you want. If you want some time.
Yeah, no, I can go first. So I guess for me, I had a roommate who was Japanese for a long time in university. And she would tell me like little things, for example, when we go out to eat, what the table manners are and things like that. And I was like, wow, there's a lot of importance given to this. And even now, when I joined Wall & Case, we had an entire training about like when you take clients out for lunch, what would the seating arrangement look like? And just to make sure that they're in a more comfortable spot than you. And that's really, really important as well. So there's things that I learned through my Japanese roommate and things I learned through training at work. And I realized like this is given a lot of importance. Yeah, that's how I kind of picked it up, I would say, for me.
Yeah, for me, there's kind of two parts to this answer. The first part is there's three things that I really remember from the training. The first was that you want to take the seat with the back so that your back is facing the door. And that comes from like back in the day when there were like shoguns and like samurai, like the samurai. Yeah, exactly. The first person to get killed, right? Like Billy the Kid, even in America, right, would sit with his back against the wall so no one could shoot him from the back. And so you got to give them the spot that has the back against the wall. So it's the first thing I remembered. The second thing I remembered was that when you're like cheersing, like when you're like, we say kanpai, like when you give a cheers, you put your cup lower than theirs to make sure that like they have like you're showing that they're the superior. And so like, and I do that like with my father-in-law, like even like over the weekend, we met my wife's sister's fiance's parents. And we all like had to make sure we were like, okay, who's like lowest? Like it's very particular. And then the third thing I remember, what's up?
Who was lowest? I'm curious about that.
I don't even know. I just knew that I was gonna go down for every person.
You're gonna go for lower.
Yes, I think.
Wouldn't that be insulting for someone who's trying to go lower and you're like?
It gets weird. It gets super weird. Like they take it very seriously here. Like where even like, so the last thing I remember is like the business cards. You have to hand the business cards, two hands, name facing them, and then you have to go lower than theirs. And it becomes like a weird competition where you're like constantly lowering yours and they're like trying to go lower than you. And like,
I would never be able to work in Japan. I don't have the flexibility to go lower.
Okay. Yeah. See? And then the second part of that answer is, as long as you're trying and like they kind of see like, okay, this guy at least knows what the etiquette is and he's like kind of making an effort, they're very lenient on foreigners. I think especially in like the recruitment industry, because like there's a lot of like foreigners in the recruitment industry, like people who are not from Japan. It's a pretty global industry in Japan. And so they're very willing to be like, okay, like Bryan, he doesn't really know exactly what he's doing, but he's trying. And then you also get kind of this pass to where like you can sort of pull what we call like, or colloquially is called like the Gaijin card. And that's like where you're just like, that means like foreigner card basically, where you're just like, you can have sort of bad manners and get away with it. Like you can be loud in the train or in the station and people are like, oh, it's just a foreigner, like probably has no idea what's going on.
That's okay. I'm so happy I asked that question because that's not the direction I was going. Like I thought it would go. Like I didn't think sitting was a problem. I thought that would be the easy part. It's the talking part that might be the problem. So I'm glad I asked. And okay, wow. In terms of the interview process in Canada, US, 16,000 interviews to get a candidate to. I'm exaggerating, obviously. What is the interview process? If someone wants to go from US to Japan and they're looking to interview, can they interview remotely? Does it have to be in person? And what does the interview process look like?
Yes, so most likely they can interview remotely. So obviously the companies that we would be recommending to somebody applying from overseas would be companies that are usually a little bit more flexible in that regard. So there are companies that prefer face-to-face interviews, but we probably wouldn't introduce those. And yeah, usually it shouldn't be more than 5 or 6 interviews. So the maximum number of interviews that I've seen happen, and that's just very, very rarely, is 6. But more often than not, actually, like I've been able to have people complete or get an offer within 4 interviews or 3 interviews even. So as long as, you know, the first 2 decision makers, and the first and second interviews usually with the most important decision makers, as long as the first 2 interviews goes well, the rest of the process becomes pretty easy.
Okay. So again, I can only compare to where I'm at, right? We usually have a recruiter call in, do a screening, then a hiring manager, then a couple of SEs, then salesperson, VP of sales, whoever, then a panel interview where we do a demo or a presentation. Is there such a thing for Japan?
Yes. So I would say the first interview is with the hiring manager. That's the same. And before that, like you mentioned, there'll be a screening call with the recruiter where we ask you what they're looking for, what the salary expectations are, and all of that. And then comes the hiring manager's interview. That's the first one. The second one is the team members, like you said, a couple of SEs or one of the SEs that you'll be working closely with. And then the third interview, either it's directly the president of the Japan office, or there'll be like a panel interview with a couple of people from the sales side as well as the technical side. And then they ask you questions and they do like a role play where you're demoing the product and things like that. And then the final interview will be with the president. So that's kind of the flow. And I haven't had a lot of companies have technical tests. They do have the demo rounds, but the technical tests usually are skipped as long as, you know, the CV and during the interview, they're able to clearly explain exactly what they were doing in their previous experience as an SE.
Okay. And you mentioned the recruiter will ask the usual questions that are asked here, including the salary expectation. I teach my clients in Canada and the US never to answer that question, right? Because we don't know yet. We don't know what the role entails. We don't know anything about that. If we're going to like our manager, if we're going to be traveling 24 hours a day, you know, all that. In Japan, if someone refuses to answer a question, is that okay? Or is that considered an insult? Where do we stand on that question?
Well, it's really up to the person. We don't really say like, you have to tell us. But when it comes to actually being in the interview process and you say, actually, I'd like to discuss my salary expectations with my recruiter through who, like I'm applying through my recruiter. So I'd rather share my salary expectations with them instead. Then companies are like more understanding about that. But then, yeah, when you're talking to your recruiter, usually we don't ask you your salary expectations in order to like lowball you or give you a lower offer. That's what companies are trying to do sometimes. But I think with recruiters, we just want to make sure we introduce the positions that really fit that range. and also to manage expectations, because the salary difference in the US and Japan can be really big sometimes. So yeah, just to have like realistic expectations with the number of years of experience that you have, what is the salary you can expect in Japan?
Okay, that's fair. Like the way we do it is don't share a number of years, but ask what the range is, like from the recruiter side, and that's when we're talking directly to the company. When there's a third-party recruiter, I don't know, like depends how you feel about the third-party recruiters. Some third-party recruiters are trying to lowball you. They just want to get you into the door so that they can get their commission. So it depends on how well you build the rapport. But if you're going directly with a company, I say like, hey, I can't tell you right now, but what is the salary range usually? And then the recruiter at that time would share. And there's more to a job than a salary, right? There's vacation days, there's benefits. Can I bring my family with me, or is it solo? Stuff like that. So that's why I say like you don't always have to answer that question, because there's more to it than just salary. It could be a lowball salary, but they give you a car with it, so you don't need to pay for a car. So okay, cool.
Yeah, if I could just add, so
please.
I don't know how I've never worked with recruiters in the States, but in Japan, generally we're incentivized to try to get the biggest salary we can for our candidates. The candidates don't pay us. That's the first thing. And we don't take our cut from their salary.
Yep.
Basically, what happens is the company pays us, and then we take a percentage based on the candidate's, the person who's applying, the applicant's salary. So basically, if like let's say you're joining a company, you worked with us, and they're going to pay you 100K, we would get 40K on top of that. It's not coming out of your pay or anything like that. It's just an additional fee that the company is paying us. And if we can get your salary to be 200K, then we would get 80K. And so we definitely try to push for as high as we can go. But yeah.
I work with a lot of great recruiters here in Canada and the US, where you can tell that they care about the individual they're working with, and they care about the company they're trying to hire, and they're trying to get the best match. And at which point you can trust them with the salary. But I've also worked with people who all they want to do is like, they want you to accept the offer, even if it's not good for you, just so that they can get whatever money and they can move on with their lives. They don't want to keep working on it. And it's I find that's true with sales in general, not just recruiters, where some salespeople want the best for their clients, and some people just want the paycheck so they can move on with their lives. And it's the same thing everywhere. So build a relationship with the recruiters, I guess. That's what I can say.
Yeah, we really look at our consulting roles very similar to sales. And it's interesting because I came from a marketing background and moved into the sales role when I moved to Japan. And that was some of the kind of the biggest learnings for me, was just like, I think there is sort of a perception of sales as being kind of scummy or like sleazy. And there's a book called To Sell is Human, which I actually really recommend. We don't get a cut. I'm not affiliated at all. I just like the book. I think it's a good book. And it kind of goes into like why sales has this kind of reputation. And then moving on from there, like how to really be a human being while you're in sales. And then also like looking at sales not so much as like you're trying to get money, but as it's really creating a win-win situation, or creating like a value exchange where people are satisfied.
You're solving problems. Yeah. And I tell people, whoever they are, if you work with another human beings, you're doing some sort of sales.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's 100%. That's exactly what the book is about. Yeah, exactly.
I didn't even read the book.
Anybody to do it.
I thought it was my idea. Damn it. Right.
No, it is. Like, great minds, right?
Shivagni, you were about to say something?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to go back a little bit to recruitment specifically. And I think in Japan, it's okay to ask your recruiter what kind of a recruitment company they're working at, because there's so many different kinds at this point, and Japan has one of the most booming recruitment industries in the world. The fees are obviously much higher than the rest of the world in Japan because it's a candidate short market. So you can totally ask your recruiter, hey, what does your team work like? Do you guys share the CVs with each other? Do you guys share my information with your colleagues? Or do you keep it to yourself? Because some recruiters get something called candidate ownership where they don't want to share this candidate with a teammate of theirs because they don't want that person to introduce any roles to them. So you have to ask these important questions when you're talking to a recruiter, what their company looks like, how they work. And like for our company, we always tell our candidates, listen, we are not an agency that tries to have any kind of candidate ownership. We want to make sure everybody has all the information that they need about you so that we can send you as many options as possible. And then this is how we make our fees. This is how we arrange the interviews. Anything that they need to ask, I think it's okay to ask about how recruitment works in that company.
Do you have a list of questions you recommend individuals to ask any recruiting company in the US or in Japan or in Europe or whatever?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I guess to start off with the one about how information is shared internally. Is my information going to be shared with your teammates or not? How does it work? How do you guys get your commission? I think it's okay to ask that. I think a recruiter should be able to explain exactly how they're able to, benefit as well, how they create the win-win situation for both you and the recruiter and the company, right? So that's a question you can definitely ask. And then how are you different from another agency in the same region? A lot of different recruitment companies have different specialties, and depending on that, they're able to say, okay, we're the right agency for you. Or maybe, you know what, I think you're more suitable for like contract position. There's two types of recruitment companies in Japan, mainly the permanent and the contract licenses that they have, the recruitment licenses. So you can totally ask if your company, covers contract positions as well and permanent positions as well. These questions are really important, especially if somebody is looking for like a permanent role as opposed to a contract role. And they don't want to find out much later in the process that, oh my God, this is a very like a fixed term contract that I've gotten, unless that's their preference. So it really depends.
Okay, that's pretty cool. Go ahead, Bryan.
Yeah, that's actually, it's like, that's a really good point. It's not to like be completely negative, but there are companies that will not tell you until you're later in the process that it's a contract position. And that it kind of happens a lot on the technical side in Japan, because a lot of the bigger companies like Google really only hire contract positions for engineers. And I've encountered people who have been in the process and not known it was going to be a contract role until they're at the offer stage and they've canceled all their other processes. And suddenly they're like, oh, I only have this job for 2 years. And if I had known that, obviously, I would have probably made a different decision earlier in the process. So it can be tough. I think that's a really good point.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I never even considered that. So that's why I like talking to people. We have this call scheduled and should end in the next 5 minutes. So I have a lot more questions. We can either redo it, or if you have a little bit more time, we can keep going. Up to you.
I'm okay until for a bit. How are you doing, Shivagni, on time?
Yeah, same. I think I'm okay till about 20 more minutes. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Cool. So I'll keep it short, and we have the not so fire round, which I ask almost every guest. So love to hear your thoughts. But I am curious. A lot of SEs in my world complain about their relationship with salespeople. What have you seen in Japan specifically in terms of SE sales relationship? Is it a partnership, or is it one kind of reporting to another, even if it's not actually reporting? But what have you seen?
Yeah, I think I've mostly seen it as two departments that have completely different responsibilities, especially with the companies that that have been hiring. They really define really well what a pre-sales engineer or a solutions architect is going to focus on, and what a salesperson is going to focus on, and where exactly they will be collaborating. And that's kind of really defined already within the company. And so you kind of follow those previously established structures of communication. But more often than not, obviously they're working very, very closely together. So it's really important during the interview process to see if you get along with the salesperson, right, that you're going to be working very closely with. And if their style is matching yours. I think some people really get along with different kinds of salespeople, and you just have to identify, okay, this is what I prefer, rather than, a more hierarchical, relationship. So if you have that idea in your mind, this is what I'm looking for, I think it becomes easier when you start talking to salespeople. You can ask those questions as well during the interview process, what their style of communication is like, and to which degree they want you to be involved. That's a really important question to ask during the interview process as well.
Knowing what you want only comes with experience, right? If someone's coming brand new, how hard is it for someone who's trying to break into sales engineering without, like, they're technical, they're engineers, they're not client facing yet, but they want to get into sales engineering? How hard is it for them to actually do that in Japan?
That's very difficult. I think mostly people try to have that career progression within the company that they're working with. So if they're working, let's say they're working as an IT consultant, it's very easy in Japan to upskill and eventually start doing some of the solutions architect, tasks within the same company. Yeah. But if you're trying to, as an IT consultant, and apply for a pre-sales role at another company, it's going to be very difficult, because they're going to ask you, what kind of pre-sales experience do you already have? And some of the key terms that they look for usually is like RFP, RFI. Have you ever worked with those documents, POCs, and things like that? And sometimes IT consultants don't even know what that is. So a good way to get into sales engineering is to learn from existing sales engineers in your company and see if you can join their department in some way, and support their team in some way, and slowly, get that role within the same company. And then you can obviously look around for other opportunities outside.
One thing we do here is that if someone is in IT, for example, IT at a bank, there is no sales engineering role there. But if they work with vendors, like, let's say they work with firewall vendors, Palo Alto, or maybe GCP, Google, they can get a job at Google Cloud as a sales engineer because they are the customer. Even in the United States and Canada, people are worried about that looking like poaching. Is that the same in Japan, or is it more frowned upon that they don't care? Where do we stand?
I haven't seen this happen much when I talk to candidates and I ask about how they got into sales engineering. If they're working with clients, either the company got acquired by the client, okay, and they ended up doing sales engineering for that company. But I don't think I've seen anybody that's actually just been like a vendor and then moved into a company to do sales engineering for that client. But I'm sure there are some exceptions. So I think the best person to answer this question would probably be a sales engineer themselves. Yeah, I haven't come across anyone yet.
I am that exact case, but in Canada, where I used to be an SE. I used to be a network design engineer at a company, and a vendor of ours needed an SE to sell into that company, and I was able to get the job to become an SE. So I hope, yeah, I'll try to talk to more Japanese SEs and see how they got there. So I appreciate that. All right. Any final thoughts? Any questions you were hoping I was going to ask you that I did not, before we jump into the not so fire round?
Anything, Bryan?
Bryan wanted me to ask him how he gets that beautiful beard.
It's not hard, actually. This is a result of me being very lazy. Dude, most people like beards in Japan are also not super common. Like, most people will shave it like every day, and I'm just like, there's no way. I did clean it up though for this, so just for you.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I cleaned it up yesterday, so
it looks great. Yeah.
All right. Shivagni doesn't care about anything we're talking about right now.
Yeah,
so, all right, go ahead.
I do care. I have a boyfriend who has a beard and everything. So, like, yeah.
Okay. Awesome. All right. It is time to move on to the not so fire round. These are the same 4 questions I ask almost every guest. I'd love to hear your thoughts. We can do it as fast as possible or as slow as possible, because it's not so fire round. So it's a play on words, not very clever, but that's what I got. Shivagni, got that. What is it that you love about what you do today? And Bryan, I'll come to you after.
I think I love the smile on people's faces when they find an opportunity that they've been looking for ages. I think sometimes people get really lost in their job hunting experience and they're like, oh my God, this is not working. I've applied to so many places. I hate this entire process. When they finally find a company that's, committing to their process as much as they are, I'm like, I love that I was able to speed that up for them.
Nice. Cool. You sound like an SE. Bryan.
Yeah, that's it. Shivagni's answer is super good. I missed that actually about being a consultant. I think being on kind of the sales side in marketing, we're very sort of isolated. So any opportunity I get to like chat with someone externally, or I meet up with some of the candidates I worked with before, or the clients that I worked with before, it's always like a really nice experience. And I do miss that kind of human connection. But I actually thought of something that I wanted to say, a question that I wanted you to ask. So we didn't really talk about the types of companies that people can potentially join. And so I think that if you're looking to move to Japan, sorry to go back.
No, that's good. That's a great question.
The perspective that I would have is that a lot of people think like, oh, they can join kind of a global company in Japan because that like global player is going to need an English kind of liaison between HQ and Japan. And I, for me personally, I largely saw that wasn't the case. Shivagni, let me know if I'm wrong, and maybe if you have a different perspective on this. But for what I saw was that a lot of the global players are looking for people to come in and sell domestically. So any global players coming and they're going to want to be interfacing with local clients. And so if you're interfacing with local clients, that Japanese expectation is much higher. Like you have to be able to speak almost native. Whereas on the flip side, actually, those domestic players who are trying to go global are actually looking for more people to work with clients that are international. And so those companies are a little bit more willing to accept like not like a super low level of Japanese, but as long as you're using it internally, like business level is okay. Whereas client facing, you're going to be speaking English. So like the big major players like Rakuten, Medicati, those kind of companies are the ones who are more likely to hire people who are not a native level of Japanese. And we do work with those companies. So if you are looking to move to Japan and you're looking for either a technical role, an SE role, something like that, or you want to be client facing, those are definitely the places I would recommend to look first. And there are exceptions on both sides to that, like obviously, but yeah.
So can they just reach out to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely Shivagni on LinkedIn. I'm just gonna pass it to her. Or on our website, like wallincase.com. Me on LinkedIn. I'm also on LinkedIn. You can definitely reach out to me. I'm totally happy to answer questions.
Okay. So there's like a find a job tab right at the top of your website that people can fill in with their names and LinkedIn profile and put up their CV. So if you don't want to bother Shivagni, which she doesn't seem to mind, you can go do it there as well. Okay. Well, thank you for that question, Bryan. I feel very smart having not asked that. So what is it? So we already asked the first question. Going back to the not so fire round. Bryan, I'll ask you this time first. What do you consider is your superpower?
Ooh, superpower makes it sound like I'm very self-aware. I think that what my colleague told me one time was recognition, and I thought that was nice. Like I remember she sent like a really nice email, and then I sent a really nice email back that was just like, "Hey, great email." And Christine, our colleague, was like, "You're so good at recognizing people," and I was like, "I'll take it." Like I guess that's fair.
That's good. That's good. I am horrible at it, so there's that. Shivagni?
I guess for me, it's being fearless in some situations where I think, I have self-doubt, but I overcome them and I said, I'm going to do it anyway.
That's pretty good. And that's why you're in Japan.
And that's why she's on this podcast too. Like I gotta say, like getting people to do stuff like this on our sales teams can be rough, but Shivagni is always a yes. And so I really appreciate that about
So
her.
why did you say yes, Shivagni?
I think I was nervous, but the reason I said yes was because I knew I was going to get to learn something. and I'm going to get to meet you, which I really respect what you've been doing, and creating the space for, pre-sales engineers to learn more about what this role is all about, because people had no idea that this role even exists. And so I love that there's an entire channel dedicated to this. So that's why I said yes, because I was like, I really want to learn as well as share everything that I know, especially about Japan market.
Well, I'll ask you when we're offline if you learn anything, because I don't want to be embarrassed if you haven't. Is there Well, Shivagni, is there a book or resource you recommend for people who want to transition into sales engineering?
Ooh, that's a good one. Let me think.
Yeah. While you're thinking, I'm going to ask Bryan. You already mentioned To Sell As Human.
Yeah, I think that's a great book. It's for anyone who's looking, it's not even necessarily just going client facing. I think anyone who has to ask for favors in their day to day, even, like, I think it's a great perspective to have of like just how to be effective in your communications, and not necessarily like always. I think one of the reasons sales gets a bad rep is because it's like seen as like really like strong arming people into doing what you want. And it's really like not about that. And it's really more about like connecting with people, understanding what they want, and how you can help them. And if it's not the right time for that to happen, like being able to say like, honestly, it's not, now is not a good time. Like you don't seem like you're ready to do this, and we're not even the best solution for you right now, so that's fine. Like you should continue on what you're doing, and let's see, maybe we can reconnect in the future, but if not, totally fine. So just kind of having that perspective, like really wanting to help, versus really wanting to like strong arm someone into doing something. That's
pretty cool. I've learned that strong arming may work once, but you lose a customer in the end, long term. Is there a book called To Market As Human? Because I think that's true as well.
I feel like marketing is literally just selling to people that you've never met. Like it's
well, yeah, just... like, but if you're looking at trying to get a job, that's pretty much what you're doing. You're marketing yourself to people to get hired. So, okay, Shivagni, going back to you. I hope you had time to think of a book.
So I think any
doesn't
book...
have to be a book.
Yeah, so I was thinking about this blog by Sahil Bloom. I think he writes really good articles about many different areas of life, but then it's a lot of it is also about how people can manage work better. Because I think sales engineering is one of the most stressful jobs that I've ever seen. And there's a lot of responsibility. And I think he is someone who writes really good blogs about how to overcome self-doubt and organize your work better to have good work-life balance and things like that. So I think that's really good. And any book about topics around working in Japan or business in Japan, I think that'll be really good as well.
Okay, I didn't catch the name. Is it how do you say his first name?
So it's Sahil Bloom. Sahil Bloom.
Sahil Bloom. Okay. All right, cool. Got it. Oh, pardon the awkward pause as I was coughing. Last question of the not so fire round. Is there a habit you're working on today to improve in your personal or professional life? And Shivagni, since you're off mute, I get to pick on you first.
I think I need to think about it.
Bryan with a Y.
Yeah, habit. I don't really have like a specific habit that I feel like I'm trying to improve, but I will say there's a couple things like in the last year that have like changed my life. This one's not so last year, it's maybe a couple years. I like never really like listened to audiobooks until like maybe 3 years ago, when I was gifted an Audible subscription from Wall and Case, actually. And that like changed my life. Like I think having kids and like just having kids, being alive, takes a lot of time. And like especially in Japan, there's like a lot of commuting, a lot of walking, and that's like the best, like just like listening to an audiobook. Like I think a lot of people do podcasts, which are great, but I think audiobooks, it's like heavily edited and really concise. Everything's like really well worded, and it's just like there's such a wealth of knowledge. So yeah, I definitely recommend audiobooks. The other thing that like really changed my life recently was I switched from Google Keep to Notion for note taking. And Notion is just like much easier to organize. And it's like Google Keep was really good for like fast notes. But I think Notion was really good just to, like kind of how I think. Notion really lined up with because I can like sub organize everything into folders and like put headings and like things like that and like really format. So those are maybe the two things that I can think of that really changed my life. Beyond that, being punctual. Like I'm really trying to get better at being on
You were
time.
early. You came
Staying ahead of things.
you were early
Dude,
here.
that was effort. Let me tell you, that was like very, very. That was a lot of effort to get here, even like the minute early that I was.
I appreciate that. Okay, Shivagni, did you get the chance to think about it?
Yeah, so I think for me, tracking expenses has been a big one. I think when I started working, I never used to track my expenses, got my first credit card and I was like, yes, I'm going to spend money. But I realized I really need to plan. And because COVID happened, I realized, oh my God, things are really not stable at all. I need to have an emergency fund. I need to have a retirement plan. I need to have like a pension fund. I need to start investing and I need to do all these kinds of things. And I think tracking my expenses was the first step to get there. So
That's an excellent habit. All right. Shivagni, Bryan, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for saying yes. And I look forward to more chats in the future.
Thank you so much, Ramsey. It was great to be here.
Yeah, we learned a lot, definitely. I'll tell you after the call.
That's good. All right. This is the end of the show. Thank you, Bryan. Thank you, Shivagni, for coming on. I appreciate your time. I appreciate what you've provided here. So the question that I have for you is, what did you think of the show? Were you curious at all about what goes on in Japan? I don't even know if I have a Japanese audience. I haven't looked at that in a while. So if you are in Japan, hopefully you enjoyed it. And if you disagree or agree, let me know. If you're outside of Japan and you're curious or you're looking to go find a job in Japan, I guess you know where to look. So I'll just leave it there. With that, I'm signing off.